Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to the Celtic Way morning briefing. It is Friday, the 15th of November, 2024. My name is Ryan McGinley at the Ryan McGinley. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Joe Donnelly at Deco2000. Joe, how are you doing?
Not bad, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No bother at all. Tony is off today. You know, he's one of the usual suspects on this podcast, so you're stepping into some big shoes here, Joe, but you've been on before. I'm sure you'll do absolutely fine. A wee quick shout out before we get started with today's topics, and we'll talk about a range of things from internationals, forthcoming internationals as well, but we'll also have a look back at the season so far and discuss the season in a bit more detail. Before we get started, if you want to support us just a little bit more, you can join our YouTube members channel for just £2.99 a month. By doing that, you'll receive early video access, priority comments, and exclusive members chat function. If you're on desktop, press that join button next to the subscribe button. And a quick shout out, if you've not already subscribed, it's completely free and you'll get notifications as to when we go live, pre-match, post-match, morning briefings, pre-recorded videos as well. Whenever they go live, you'll get a notification. Join the comments section. It's getting bigger and bigger by the day. So yeah, that's completely free. And if you want to join in, then please do so. Joe, let's talk about, first of all, the things that have happened in the present before we talk about the things that happened in the past, even though it's the very, very recent past. Arne Engels made his first start for Belgium last night against Italy. He played 72 minutes for the Red Devils against Italy. So that's great news for Celtic, isn't it? You know, it's been a bit of a mixed start from him, I'd say, for his Celtic career. Some really good moments and maybe mixed games as well, but it's great to see that Domenico Tedesco really rates his player, this midfielder, to trust him in a game of that magnitude.
Yeah, 100%. And as you say, getting his first start, he got his first call up when he came in the door, just as he came in the door at Celtic. And I've actually been looking after the news desk this morning, so work never stops here at the Celtic. Well, let me give you some quotes from Belgian media. I'm probably going to mispronounce some of this here. Het last news via Google Translate. Engels showed maturity and precision in his passing, which was crucial for Belgium's ball possession. The Standard highlighted his defensive contribution. Engels was tireless in winning the ball back and displayed impressive stamina throughout the entire match. These have all been run through Google Translate, by the way, so some of these might be a little bit woolly. And La Libre Belgique, easy for me to say. Engels proved that he is ready for the highest level and can become a mainstay in the Red Devils midfield. So, you know, despite losing 1-0, they lost a goal in the 11th minute, I think. From what I could see in the stats, I saw the goal and the stats alone, and the really basic stats. It looked like Italy were deserving of that, especially when you score so early and you know, seem to kind of see out the game from 11 minutes forward. However, superficial reports on Arne Engels or not, they seem to be quite impressed. And I saw as well, just before coming on the briefing here, that Engels himself was just saying, you know, the usual things that players say in defeat, you know, disappointed not to get the result for the team. But personally, he was pleased to be recognised and given the responsibility of making the start. So, yeah, you know, he seems to be going from strength to strength at the moment. His Celtic performances have been improving, I think, with every game. And I think he's really kind of settling in here at Celtic. Obviously, a young player coming to a new country and all the stuff that comes with that. But this can only do his confidence a world of good.
Yeah, I think patience is key with a player like Engels, despite his £11 million price tag, because I think that he'll more than make up for that, for the amount that Celtic have paid. I remember speaking to Derek Ray before he signed, or when that rumour was going about that Engels was a potential Matt O'Reilly replacement. I was quite glad to get that interview ahead of time, because it's good to read back on it. He was full of high praise for the player, and we've seen it in glimpses. He is getting better and better. I think especially recently there's been a bit of an upturn in form, which has been brilliant to see. But there's definitely a player there to work with. In terms of other internationals, Scotland play Croatia tonight, and that's an opportunity potentially for the likes of Tony Ralston, who, you know, has been playing right back for Scotland recently, to get another start under Steve Clarke. I'm not. Greg Taylor get called up for Scotland as well. Could potentially be a game for him to maybe come off the bench in place of Andy Robertson, who's in really good form just now for Liverpool and his national team respectively. And then you've got Japan v Indonesia at around about 12 o'clock today UK time. That could be a potential game for Rio Hatate, Aizen Maeda and of course Kyogo Furuhashi to get an appearance in the national team. So there's plenty of representatives for Celtic in international football. Who are you most looking forward to seeing in the lineup? Is it Kyogo you're looking forward to seeing getting a game for his national team after a couple of years away?
I think so. I think that's what most Celtic fans are looking at. I think the big worry for any of the Japanese guys, and this has happened to both Maeda and to Tate in more recent times, that they make these journeys to their national teams a bit further away than most, and they don't get time. They get the odd, I think Maeda's had a sprinkling of minutes over the last kind of couple of months, got himself a goal. In a couple of international breaks back, God, there's so many now that it's hard to remember which one was which. But I know that Rio Hatate's kind of struggled for game time. Given that Kyogo's been out of the fold, will he get to play? Obviously, time will tell. But I hope he does. And I hope that for his own sake, it's a confidence game a lot of the time as well, isn't it? I'm sure that players publicly kind of play down the disappointment of not making the cut. Some of them are very open about it, but I'm sure that it must play on their mind. And I know that they're not ever disparaging to their teammates, but perhaps you're looking and thinking, I'm playing in Champions League, I'm playing scoring goals. I think Kyogo's got 6 goals and 3 assists, if I remember rightly, so far for Celtic across the board this season. So you'll be looking at other players and thinking, I'm playing well and should have been with a shout. So yeah, I think Kyogo's the main one for me. Like I say, every single time Celtic go into these international breaks, as long as there's no injuries, I'll generally be quite pleased when the club football comes back, and it's roaring from here on, isn't it?
It certainly is. I think this is the calm before the storm, because this time next week, and I've made a point to myself, and we all have actually, that we're not going to speak about the Hearts game until at least Wednesday next week, because we found that we were previewing the Celtic Aberdeen game for a good 2 weeks. Granted, it lived up to it, especially with the second half being up and down, but we were previewing that game for far too long, and I think we're going to take a wee look back rather than a look forward at this point in time. But yeah, I think there is a selfish element of covering Celtic and supporting Celtic or whatnot with the players, especially with the fact that this, from when the players come back, this is them until March. It's going to be one old slog in 3/4 different competitions, because you'll have the Scottish Cup to contend with in the new year as well. Fighting on 4 fronts, fighting on 3 at the one time will be interesting, but you wouldn't want it any other way. This is when the fun begins when it comes to covering Celtic and watching Celtic, because this is the schedule that will determine whether Celtic have a successful season or not, if they can navigate through it, and they've done so well over the past few years. And you'd expect them to do similar, especially with the squad depth that they've got in the team. But I thought we would have a wee look at the season back so far. It's been a near perfect league campaign so far. The only drop points have come against the joint top team in Aberdeen. Apart from that, there's been 9 clean sheets in 11 games, I believe. The only goals that Celtic conceded of those two to Esther Sockler and Graham Shinney, and the penalty that Ross County scored up at Dingwall as well. So it's been a good defensive start to the season. I guess that's probably a good place to start. The defence has looked so much more resolute this season, even though there's been changes, even though it's been an unsettled back line. You've had Alex Bailly come in, Greg Taylor, Tony Ralston for a couple of games, Johnson most of the season. You've got Scales, you've got Cameron Carter-Vickers has been in and out due to injury, and then you've got Austin Trusty, who's been a bit of a mainstay since he's came into the team against Bratislava, coming off the bench. So that back line, despite all those changes, Joe, it's looking really, really resolute, and that shows in the lack of goals that they've conceded, especially domestically.
Yeah, and I think when you ring through all those players just now, you do get a sense of that strength and depth. I know we say it all the time about Celtic being rooted in strength and depth, but when things aren't going so well, there is that comparison between strength and depth and just a big squad or a bloated squad. Every one of those players you named has stood out in some way this season so far. Probably the most hard done by is Liam Scales amongst those. He hadn't really put a foot wrong, but Austin Trusty's come in, really proven his worth, and Carter-Vickers is almost undroppable when he's in the squad and playing so well. So that shows the standards. Liam Scales has been brilliant since he's come in. Brendan Rodgers said it was a tough decision to make, but when they signed Austin Trusty in the summertime for $6 million, it was probably always going to be this way. still need to come in and do it, and probably it's not, I mean, I'm not saying it's harder to come in as a defender than it is to come in as a striker, but strikers can have quiet games where they maybe, don't score every chance that they get, or they make mistakes that don't lead to anything. At the other end of the pitch, it's much more difficult to do that because people remember the mistakes. So to come in and to be so resolute, to be so settled, as you say, in an unsettling time, has really made the difference for Celtic this season. And I think if you go back to last season, when things weren't going so well, in terms of the standards that Celtic have set, round about this time last season, there was some questions about how many goals that Celtic were shipping, or maybe lapses in defence. We've not seen that this year, and it's been a joy to watch. And I think that one thing that Brendan Rodgers has always managed to do very well is that congested fixture schedule, both his last time and this time. And his perceivably worst stretch was last year. December was quite a difficult month for Celtic last year. And I think that Brendan Rodgers is always talking about learnings. He's always talking about the players learning. He's always talking about him learning, be that at Celtic or away or in Europe or domestically. I think that they'll take a lot of learnings from last year when it was kind of backs to the wall. And I know the manager was rightly or wrongly bemoaning narratives in the media at the time. I think he'll have learned a lot from that off the pitch as well. So I think coming into this really busy fixture schedule, given how good Celtic have been this year, given how good Brendan Rodgers has at keeping momentum at a busy time, I think that it's going to be hectic. And as you say, as people who are critiquing Celtic as Celtic supporters, you wouldn't have it any other way. Speak to me in March when we're absolutely exhausted and can't wait for the next international break. But it feels like it's been a little stop-start this year, in the sense of there's been an international break every single month. But Celtic have weathered it. I think we've spoken to death about the disappointment in Dortmund. But when I was last up at Lennoxtown on behalf of the Herald, I put that to the manager. I said, when he speaks about learnings, this team learning in Europe, something he addressed as soon as he was talking about Europe, ahead of Bratislava this year. He said he wants the players who have been here to learn from Europe last year, and he wants the new players to learn from players that have been here. But if you look at the pantheon of European games so far, Bratislava, Dortmund, Atalanta, and of course RB Leipzig, there's been every single performance you would want in terms of learnings. Okay, the Dortmund result wasn't great, but if you're going to be given a heavy defeat, you want players to learn from it. And I hope that extends to the domestic calendar as well. And it certainly seems like it has so far this year. Casper Schmeichel, I know that you guys in the Celtic, we have written a lot about him, be that opinion pieces praising him, be that Stuart Ross analysis, really digging into the numbers. He's been phenomenal. He's been resolute. He's been a real stalwart, a monolith of confidence, and that obviously filters through to the team as well. And you're really starting to see that now a few months in. Any talk about him being too old, or why are we going after someone who is in the back end of his career? I think that he looks like he's certainly got a few years left, and I'm hoping that that's at Celtic. Talk about extending his 1 year deal.
I just remember being one of those dissenting voices in July. I said it was going to be a tough sell, bringing in a 37, 38-year-old goalkeeper to replace Joe Hart, who admittedly was younger than Casper Schmeichel. The two of them worked alongside each other through the ranks at Manchester City. But I'm so glad to be having the biggest slice of Danish humble pie at the moment, because he's been absolutely tremendous, arguably one of Celtic's players of the season. And I think he really did show those levels last weekend against Kilmarnock, in a game that Celtic last season, and Brendan Rodgers alluded to it, that's a game that they would have dropped points in and maybe lost, because, and they did. You look at last time out, one of the last times out against Kilmarnock at Rugby Park, out with the 5-0 game that they won to win the league. They had a real struggle. But the difference is now that they've got a settled back line. They've got 3 or 4 players that can come in to the team at any given moment and still maintain those high levels. You don't have, and it's not to sound disrespectful to these players, but you don't have Nat Phillips anymore. Mike Nawrowski's out of the team. Gustav Lagerbielke is away at FC20, who's hardly getting any game time as well. There's now a settled core of players, and players know where they stand in that defence, and they're getting game time, even if they're not always in the starting lineup. And Greg Taylor's had to suffer that recently, because Alex Bailly's came in and really shown why he's a talented youngster and through Barcelona's ranks. But there's now players in every position that can come in and make a difference. Ralston Ralston gets more games for Scotland at the moment than Celtic.
I was just thinking that when you mentioned it earlier. Yeah.
It just shows you how strong this team is, and people can have their opinions on Tony Ralston. I think he's a tireless worker that will never let you down. Yes, his technical level maybe isn't up there compared to Alistair Johnston. I think everybody would have Alistair Johnston starting over Ralston, but he's never going to let you down when he's in that team. It's important to have a littern of Scottish boys in and around the team, and I think you'll see that in midfield when we discuss that. But is there anything else you want to touch on with regard to the defence? Because I think it's a really positive place to be. There's an analysis piece coming out in the next couple of days from Alan Morrison on Austin Trusty's numbers. I'm looking forward to getting into that and finding out the specifics of that, because I think, especially recently since the Atalanta game, I think he's been arguably Celtic's best player in terms of bringing that solidity and leadership at the back as well. He's not a young player, he's 26 years old, he's in his prime, but he's shown the levels, he's shown why he's a £6 million defender, and it's all about fits in football. And I think he's found his perfect fit at Celtic. He had Sheffield United, he had Birmingham, he had Arsenal, Colorado Rapids. He seems to have found his perfect fit, and that's alongside Cameron Carter-Vickers in the back line.
Totally, and I think we spoke about this. I think it was the last time I was on the podcast about the way that Engels reads the game, and he's trying to pass through the lines, and he's always looking for that attacking style of defence. And something that Cameron Carter-Vickers has done, effortlessly since coming into Celtic a few years ago. There's one last thing on Casper Schmeichel, again, up at Lennoxtown last on behalf of the Herald, and he was speaking about, it was put to him that, at Celtic you can go long spells where goalkeepers aren't necessarily required, and he took slight umbrage with that, and I think this is before the Kilmarnock game, and I think we saw, it's funny when someone says something and you already kind of knew it, but it becomes, when someone verbalises it, it's easier to kind of analyse. He was saying, well, you say that goalkeepers aren't called upon, but maybe that was the case in the traditional game, 10, 15 years ago, before keepers were playing the sweeper keeper, Manuel Neuer style role. He said, but I'm involved the whole game. I'm playing, well into the half. I'm linking up the defence. I'm making sure the ball's moving around. We saw that wonderful pivot or pirouette or turn or whatever you want to call it, where in years gone by, heart and mouth stuff, what are you doing? But he just did it so effortlessly. And that, he might not be making fantastic saves from start to finish. He did have a few at Rugby Park, but that, he seemed to kind of almost, he wasn't annoyed, but he took slight issue with the fact that you'd say goalkeepers aren't involved. He said, I'm involved from start to finish. I'm communicating, I'm receiving the ball, I'm looking for the next attack. And that in tandem with players like Austin Trusty, with Cameron Carter-Vickers, Alex Bailly, Greg Taylor, whoever's pushing up Alistair Johnston, is looking for that attacking mindset in the Celtic defence. It's been great, as you say, and I've been saying this all season. I'm hardly the only person saying it, but you still feel like there's so much more to come. And that's the wonderful thing about where Celtic are at the moment. And then, as supporters and as critics, we've earned that right to be confident in the moment, and it's a good place to be in. It can come crashing down at any moment, but in the here and now, it's a joy to watch.
Just moving on to the next area of the park, probably the most exciting area of the park, in my opinion, with how much talent is there at Celtic's disposal. The midfield, the engine room. It's one hell of an engine room, Joe. I'll keep it brief for you to answer. But is this the most exciting? And in terms of squad depth, is it the deepest midfield you've ever seen at Celtic in terms of individuals that can come in and realistically change a game and make things happen? McGregor, Hatate, Paulo Bernardo, Arne Engels, Luke McCowan. There's other players in the background that can't even get near the bench, never mind the starting lineup. Is this the most exciting midfield you've seen in a number of years? It's
a midfield full of egos, which can sound as if it's getting negative.
I know exactly what you mean, and I like it.
But it's a positive thing, and I think that, it is only November, and I hate to make these comparisons so early, but I'm speaking very personally. I'm not speaking for anyone else. In terms of how I feel when I watch this team, the entertainment value for me personally is up there with Martin O'Neill's era. Now, I'm not saying it's better. I'm not saying that it can go toe-to-toe. It's a completely different style of football. Football's moved on so much since. I'm just speaking about someone who watched them then in person and is watching them now. And with that ego, with those egos come, a variety of different play styles naturally. Now, I know that we've had this over the years, but as you say, ringing off all those names, when they're on song, when they're, firing all cylinders, Callum McGregor's, short passing and always in space. Every single time, watch him at any time, he's always in space. He's get away from his man, easy to receive the ball, looking forward, looking back when he needs to. Brendan Rodgers called him a quarterback in his last time at Celtic, and that's what it's like. He's moving, he's looking for the pass, he's always got his head up. Luke McCowan coming off the bench, that dig, but that finesse as well, looking to get those shots off, edge of the box. A couple have come off for him since he's moved to Celtic, and I can see more coming from there. Arne Engels is still proving himself, but he's a joy to watch when he's moving. That when he does that box to box style, he's just all over the place. And some fantastic stats you're starting to see coming through. And of course, Rio Hatate, I know that he's not been without. Well. Yeah, definitely. And I know that Rio Hatate's been, in for some criticism in some Celtic supporters' eyes, rightly, wrongly, harshly, unfairly, whatever. Against RB Leipzig, some of that vision, some of that passing it's just a joy to watch. Like defence splitting passing. And I know that he can frustrate at times, and maybe his decision making isn't always perfect. But this season, I think it's definitely kind of kicked on a bit more. And just been able to watch him see the game before you do. And again, he's a professional football player, and that's his job to do so. But then when you see it come off with some of the, again, I'll go back to that RB Leipzig game. It was just phenomenal. So to see, when I say egos, I mean it in a positive light at this moment in time. And again, it goes back to what I just said about, you can see more from this team. Here is where those egos are going to really need to come to the fore. We're probably going to see more of Luke McCowan in this busy stretch. Touch wood, there's no injuries, but there will be fatigue, especially when it's, Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday, whatever, from here on. Cup finals to come up, as you say, the Scottish Cup will kick in January. It's going to be busy, but I can't wait to see more and more of this midfield working together. And of course, there's the slight variations. Is Bernardo going to start? Is McCowan going to start? Is it going to be Engels, Hatate and McGregor? Or is it going to be a switch on that? I mean, what a position to be in. What a position to be in, and what a headache for Brendan Rodgers.
It is definitely a headache. Because you've hardly even spoke about Paulo Bernardo there, who I believe, and it's just my opinion, I think he's got the highest ceiling of any Celtic midfielder that's at the club currently. I think he's the perfect box to box, and he's only 22. He's not 23 till next year. Quite a frightening talent and maturity beyond his years in terms of coming off the bench. And the perfect attitude as well. I was speaking about this earlier on this week. I was saying that he could have easily thrown his toys out the pram at not starting games. He came in for $3.5 million. It could have been $6 million. Celtic haggled down that fee to 3.5 with a sell-on clause. But and then he was the flavour of the month for the flavour of the week. And then Arne Engels came in, Luke McCowan came in, and he was kind of, people were talking about him. And then that performance against Rangers, he's responded to every single sort of trial and tribulation that's came his way. He's not the first choice midfielder, but I think he's going to end the season as one of Celtic's first choice midfielders just due to his attitude. Big fan of Paulo Bernardo and looking forward to seeing how his career develops at Celtic. He's here for the long haul, and I think he'll be such an important player. Hopefully we see a lot more of him in this next block of fixtures, because I don't think anybody's got anything bad to say about Bernardo. I think people were maybe on the fence about him signing permanently. He had that intervention, of course, in the Scottish Cup final with that original shot, the running shot that Adamida scored the rebound off of. Nobody was doubting that after the Rangers game. Everyone was like, wow, he was a goal away from probably putting in one of the best Glasgow Derby performances in recent years. That goal he should have scored just before half-time when he beat two players and then shot it straight at Jack Butland. If that had went in, I guarantee we'd probably still be talking about it at this moment in time. But Paulo Bernardo, really, really good, solid option.
Yeah, and he's away on international duty again with Portugal under-21s. It escapes me who they're playing, and also when. This is terrible on a live show. Someone can look it up for me. A point I'm making is he's been phenomenal for Portugal as well, and scoring some mighty goals, to quote the comment there. With every, I'm not to put any pressure on, because I'm sure he watches that pod and I don't want to put any pressure on his shoulders. But he seems to be scoring goals for fun for Portugal on 21s, and some fantastic goals, really carrying that form into the Portugal under 21s. And I completely agree with Hazel Finn with so much still to go and so much to give. And that mindset that you speak of is exactly what is needed in that position in a Brendan Rodgers team, isn't it? I think, apples and oranges, but a player that I always go back to in Brendan Rodgers' first time is Stuart Armstrong. A player that was at the periphery of his plans and, understood what the manager was saying, took the message on board and made himself a player that, eventually went to the Premier League. I hope the Bernardo stays around, but he seems to be listening to everything that he's learning from Brendan Rodgers and then taking it onto the pitch. And of course, we don't see behind the scenes. We don't see Lennox Town every day. And what a player to have who might not be, thank you so much, Ukraine tonight at 5:30. I'll be watching to see how he gets on for sure. But yeah, what a player to have behind the scenes, to be pushing everybody and to be being pushed by everyone on the training pitch. It's, I sound like I'm just gushing, but when you take stock, when you have a chance to do it in an international break, it does allow you to reflect and to think about the performances that these players are putting in so early in the season. Yeah, there's still time for a lull in form, as much as I hate to say it. This is when things get really tough. But Brendan Rodgers has been saying since the start of the season that we're going to see more of people like Tony Ralston. We're going to see more of the squad as a whole. And of course, if Paulo Bernardo isn't starting every week, he's going to be used a lot throughout that time as well. I think, without wishing the season ahead, fast forward to May, I'm fascinated to see what the stats hold. How many performances, how many appearances has Paulo Bernardo made compared to Arne Engels, compared to, Callum McGregor's an unfair one because he is a stalwart throughout, but I think we're going to see a real spread like we haven't seen before, as the manager is confident to let Cal sit on the sidelines for a game and hand the captain's armband to Alistair Johnson or Cameron Carter-Vickers or whoever steps up. It's not unreasonable that come the end of the season we've seen Paulo Bernardo, wear the captain's armband just because he is that aggressive box-to-box midfielder. And again, I'm delighted that Celtic can be even having these conversations as fans.
I'm so glad that he's a permanent player as well, not that he's on loan. Again, he's Celtic's very own player. And I think he needed to feel that, that love from the supporters and the love from the club, that trust. They definitely have that trust in the player, and he's there for the long haul. You talk about this midfield. Imagine if you were to add Lennon Miller to the ranks as well. That would be honestly the depth.
Almost too much.
Yeah, I know, and that's the thing. I don't want Bernardo's development to be stunted because they get another midfielder through the door. I would much rather Celtic develop Bernardo more than bringing in another player, but I know that there's loads of different moving parts. Hatate will probably move on in the summer. If that's the case and he keeps on going the way he's going, he'll leave with everybody's best wishes. I'm just forecasting. I don't know anything about him going away, but you would just think out of all the midfielders that are there at this moment in time, he would be the one to potentially leave. 26 going on 27, probably wants to make that next step. Looking at the forward line, Joe, there's been a nice trend return to a Brendan Rodgers side after a bit of an anomaly last season. A lot of the goals weren't coming from the wide areas. But my goodness, there's goals now from wide areas. Not just from Nicholas Kuhn, who has been Celtic's. I don't think anyone can argue with the fact that Nicholas Kuhn has been Celtic's best player this season in terms of numbers, certainly offensively. But Daizen Maeda is now scoring more goals as well. He's only a couple of goals off his best ever total for Celtic, and he's only in the middle of November. You can see him breaking that total and then some, getting maybe 20, 25 goals if he keeps on going the way he's going. It's great to see that there's goals now happening on the wings again. It's synonymous with a Brendan Rodgers team. You think of Paddy Roberts, James Forrest. I know he's still at the club. Different players as well. Scott Sinclair, I can't believe I mentioned him third rather than first because he is the stereotypical Rodgers winger. But it's great to see that the numbers are definitely stacking up in those areas, and it's helping because there isn't as much goals coming from the strikers at this moment in time. So it's good to see the wingers now contributing in goals and assists too.
Yeah, and I know that you mentioned James Forrest. I know that having spoken to James a number of times over the years, because obviously when Brendan Rodgers came in 2016, there was talk at the time about would James Forrest stay at Celtic, and one of the things Brendan Rodgers said to him was, you're a fantastic contributor, but needing more goals and assists. And then from that line forward, it was 16 goals and 17 assists. It was 17 goals and 18 assists, from 2016-17 all through the treble seasons. It seems like the manager's had that conversation with Callum McGregor this season, just in terms of, you can still contribute a lot. Now Celtic's top goal scorer in the league. I think joint top goal scorer in the league with 5 goals in the Scottish Premiership this year. which is remarkable. And you're right, that DNA, that signature, wide areas, getting the ball into danger areas, creating chances. And I mean, without oversimplifying football, I know that it's much more analytical these days, but if the ball's in those areas, if it's coming from wide areas and it's in, it's between the last defender and the goalkeeper, there is a chance that you get things. Probably best illustrated by Celtic's second goal against RB Leipzig. That real high intense press by the machine that is Dyson Maeda. Ball to Rio Hatate wide area, on to Greg Taylor. Greg Taylor puts it across, and an opportunistic Nicholas Kuhn gets himself in front, capitalising on a Dyson Maeda miss kick, which, despite the goals that Dyson Maeda gets, he still has his. It
was a lovely dummy. It was a fake shot from Dyson Maeda.
Exactly. It was a cultured feint from Dyson Maeda. But it's great to see, and I think if you look back to last season, in terms of those getting a grip of the wide players, I think Brendan Rodgers, and he no doubt has admitted this himself, it's not coming to me off the top of my head if he has, but I'm sure he would admit it if he hasn't. He probably didn't quite have a handle on the wide areas last year until January, until James Forrest came back into the team and really started pushing that forward. There was still some perseverance with Mikey Johnson, who obviously was on his way out towards the end of the season. Nicholas Kuhn had those dental issues and he was still proving himself. Liel Abada had his own issues at the club and, of course, was such a prolific player and then was on his way out. So there was that kind of transition period that the manager seems to have really kind of settled down this season. Nicholas Kuhn, I mean, what can you say about him? And what more is to be said in terms of superlatives about his contributions this year? And again, as we keep saying, it is only halfway through November. He's been phenomenal. Arguably quiet by his standards up until the goal against RB Leipzig, and then he's in the team of the week, and deservedly so. Coming off, getting himself involved in the Kilmarnock game, and again, not quiet by his standards, but getting that goal and just, it's just a normal day in the office for him. And Maeda has been phenomenal. He's been phenomenal. He still misses opportunities in games, but yet can still score a hat trick. That's the kind of player that we're seeing from him this year. And it's been, again, I sound like a broken record saying it's been great to watch, but it really has. It really has, and it's only halfway through November. How is it only halfway through November and we can be so pleased with Celtic so far?
It's quite a weird situation to be in. I know after last season, things were good under Ange Postecoglou, especially the second season. Always seems to be the second season that things really click. I know that Brendan Rodgers had that great invincible treble first season. Yes, he got a treble in his second season, but he'll be hoping to get the same at the end of this one in his second season as well. But yeah, it's just been a great start so far. Out with the Borussia Dortmund game. Just quickly before we finish off, what has been your moment of the season so far, Joe? And there's been a few. I would reckon a 3-0 win against Rangers at home, Leipzig, Slovan Bratislava, late winners against the likes of Ross County. That last game against Kilmarnock where they showed real mental and physical fortitude. What's been your moment so far of the season? I know it's only been a couple of months, but there's certainly plenty that you could go with here.
I think I'm going to cheat and do two, and they're both in the Champions League. The Atalanta draw and the RB Leipzig win, just because they stood for two really important things for Celtic, in my opinion. Atalanta proved, don't need me to say that, most respect to Brendan Rodgers, but it proved that Celtic could play differently, despite him saying it was the same setup and approach the game the same way. It proved that under Brendan Rodgers they could be steadfast, they could be pragmatic, and they could show a resilience that perhaps we hadn't seen under Brendan Rodgers in Europe, arguably at all. And I think the significance of that result, will send shockwaves throughout the season. The Leipzig game, just to agree with the comment there, it was the performance of the season. It was arguably, I made the comparison between it and the Benfica 3-0 2007 under Gordon Strachan. There have been bigger European results in the 21st century, in terms of the big ones, the Manchester United, Barcelona, even Lazio, Juventus back in 2001. But that Benfica game was a game that was against a great opponent that Celtic dominated from start to finish. Now, they didn't dominate from start to finish against Leipzig, but they did dominate when they had to. On the ropes a little bit at 1-0 down, but got through it. And then the performance from the rest of the game was phenomenal. My dad and I walking back from the game just couldn't believe how good Celtic were. Couldn't believe how confident they were, how aggressive they were, and how much they made RB Leipzig kind of crawl into their shell. And I think, don't get me wrong, as we're always saying, the bread and butter is domestic football, and I hope that Celtic can continue firing all cylinders in the Premiership. I'd love to see them dominate in the domestic cups as well. But if we needed to prove something in the Champions League next year, which seems to be the narrative that Brendan Rodgers has been kind of projecting from the very start, then Dortmund result aside, and not the end of the world, because I hope that there's been learnings there, and it seems that there has. The European performances have been, again, Dortmund aside, have been fantastic. And it could drop off a cliff from here, but you don't get the feeling it will. I said this before Dortmund and they lost 7 goals, but I just think that it's the building blocks are there now to show that, I hope that Celtic can get to the playoffs as planned this year. If they don't, what they're showing so far in Europe bodes so well for years to come if you go back to those learnings. So, yeah, Atalanta and RB Leipzig are completely integral to that as far as I see it. And I'm hoping that there's some more Champions League joy from here on.
Yeah, and 2 very different performances
Yeah.
against Atalanta and RB Leipzig. 3 if you count the Bratislava game. I like that. I like the fact that you mentioned that. The 3 very different ways of getting points, but they're all just equally as effective. Obviously, the 2 wins and the draw, but they're still getting points in Europe, which is in turn making them money as well, which is brilliant. And they're making stars in the likes of Nicholas Kuhn, which will mean that they can sell them on in a couple of years for a healthy profit. So it's a successful business model. It's a successful team at the moment and a really successful start to the campaign for Celtic. Joe, I know you're a bit rushed for time, so thank you very much for joining me this morning. Really do appreciate it. Thank you to all that have watched this video. If you've not already subscribed, press that subscribe button. It's completely free. You'll get notified as to when we go live. Quick shout out that you can support our work. Just £2.99 a month. You click that join button if you're on the desktop. You'll receive early video access, priority comments, exclusive members chat function. On the website today, there is an interview. I did an interview a couple of weeks ago with Exeter City's club secretary on Paul Tisdale, who was the manager there for 12 years, who's the new head of football operations at Celtic. If you want to check that out, that is on the top of the screen on the Celtic Way website. So if you want to learn more about the head of football operations, then click on that. Joe, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure.
And thanks to everybody. Enjoy your weekend, guys. We'll be back on Monday morning with myself, Hamish, and Tony will be back as well to discuss all things Celtic as we move into a very busy week and part of the season for the club as a whole. Cheers, guys, and we'll see you all on Monday. Thank you very much.